they can store it safely, but they can also use it for increasingly more and more things. And so, but just to touch on the exchange point, because that's often the first way that people get involved, they have to come in and buy a little bit of it to understand it and start to use it. So an exchange is really just maintaining a list of people who at any given moment they want to buy or sell a particular crypto asset, and you're making an order book. So it's a little bit like the NASDAQ or the New York Stock Exchange. And if you have they call them bids and asks in this order book, and anytime somebody is willing to pay more than the person who's willing to sell it for the least, the prices cross and a transaction occurs. And so operating an exchange is certainly one of the things we do.
Okay. All right. So I'll just here's my experience with Coinbase.
I remember having this thought where I was like, this is really interesting. In fact, this might be the most interesting, important thing I've read in a long time. And it was describing this kind of crazy idea, which was that, well, we have the internet, and the internet is a decentralized thing that no country controls. And that's really democratized how we move information around. But what if we had a similarly decentralized protocol that democratized how we move value around? And this comes to that idea of provable scarcity of digital assets. It's not just information, which can be duplicated everywhere. It's actually value, because each of these can be provably unique. And I remember all these thoughts kind of went through my head. I had to reread that paper probably 4 or 5 times, by the way. But I remember thinking, would anybody actually use this? Why would they trust it? Would governments try to shut it down? Could there be some flaw in the cryptography that would kind of blow the whole thing up? And I kind of just couldn't stop thinking about it for about 6 months. And I started to go to these early Bitcoin meetups around the Bay Area. And I can tell you that was quite an experience too, if you want to talk about that. So yeah, that was how it started.
Unusual people in the early days.
Yeah, the people who would show up there, so I kind of loved, can I be rewarded for that and actually keep it, right? And if that's true, like property rights, these very, then people will try to do more good stuff. And if you look at the data, this is actually highly correlated with really positive things that you want in society. So high economic freedom countries, they have not just higher GDP growth and things like that, but they have higher self-reported happiness of citizens, better treatment of the environment, less corruption.
Cleaner air, cleaner water, better schools.
Right. It even correlates with like having less war and, so, and I had seen a little bit of this. I spent a year living in Argentina, in Buenos Aires, and I got to see a country that used to be one of the top 10 countries of the world, this kind of Paris of South America. And it essentially, through a series of these negative government actions, like had fallen to maybe, 120th place in the world. And it was this society that had really been ruined by, high inflation and corruption and really a lack of property rights. I mean, people's assets could just be seized at a moment, and the poorest people in society were kind of having their wealth eroded because they were holding cash. And so I was very much—
Brian, I have news for you. You now have a fiduciary responsibility to your shareholders. Your job is not to expand freedom in the world. Your job is to make your shareholders the highest returns you can. So isn't there a tension now between the stated mission, which as I understand it is still very much the mission, you still emphasize this, the stated mission, and just plain old what corporate America and your investors are going to expect of you?
Actually, I don't think so. I think they're very much aligned. I think great companies should have a big, important mission in the world that's beyond just making money. But usually the only way to actually go accomplish that mission is you need a lot of capital, and you need a lot of really talented people, right? And so how do you do that? I mean, you've got to have a great business model, and you've got to generate a profit, and then you got to be able to use that capital to apply it towards even more important things, so you can grow and make progress towards that mission. So, example would be in the U.S., for instance, we operate spectacular fashion as well. So Coinbase has taken a very different approach over the last 11 years. From the earliest days, we said, all right, I want to build this company in America. I'm an American citizen. It was always obvious to me that you have to follow the law that exists today. We're probably going to need new laws for cryptocurrency because there's a couple areas of the law where it's a little unclear. But in the absence of that clarity, don't try to steal a base. Try to do something reasonable that you think would be the right thing to do in the absence of clarity. And so the earliest days, we went and met with regulators. I put on the suit and tie, and we kind of advocated for clear legislation. We got all the licenses that were available to us at the time, did that now in more and more markets around the world. So I think the last few years have been very validating of that strategy. By the way, if you're going to follow a regulated, compliant approach, you can't always move as fast. And that was sometimes like really difficult to see, especially in like 2021 when these competitors were rocketing up and our investors and people would ask us like, well, why haven't you launched debates about whatever controversial topic of the day? We said, hey, we're going to bring in people from all different backgrounds and different beliefs, but we're all unified in our belief about cryptocurrency and economic freedom. We're going to focus on that at work. And I have to say the job as CEO got a lot easier. A lot of other Fortune 500 CEOs called me and kind of said like, oh my gosh, how did you do this? We want to do the same thing. They were all feeling under so much pressure. Like there's just so much activism, we can't get anything done. And I mean, you're seeing elements of this still happen to this very day, like, inside Google, et cetera. And so I think and I hope it'll be a playbook for other companies to follow. We were early, we got a lot of hit pieces on it, but I think in hindsight, now where people are, they've realized that was probably the right thing to do.
That says something about Coinbase. If I may, it also says something about you. You seem like a peach of a guy. You also have to be tough because all of Silicon Valley was moving in one direction and Brian Armstrong said, nope, not Coinbase. We're going to do business.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I'm making this growing and exciting new sector of the economy, cryptocurrency. And then the SEC didn't need to engage in regulation by enforcement because Congress would have done its job. What should that regulatory framework look like?
Mm-hmm. So this is a great question. I mean, this is exactly what, by the way, the rest of the G20 countries are all doing at this point. Like Europe has actually already passed this legislation called MiCA. Singapore, Australia, Brazil, Canada, they're all in various stages of doing this. So the US is actually kind of behind on this process, which gets to some of the dysfunction happening in DC. But I believe it'll come together. There's political will, and there's 52 million Americans who now actually want to elect pro-crypto candidates that understand you have to balance like the innovation potential of this with protecting consumers. So we need a comprehensive framework. We can't have a politicized SEC just trying to shut it down or something.
Right.
Okay, so what should that framework look like? So some areas of the law around this are actually already clear. I don't think they need an update. So for instance, anti-money laundering rules, the aperture of how many people could use the internet without even caring about the underlying technology. And so crypto I think it's yet to maybe have that moment where how do we make this easy and accessible to a broad range of people? And that's part of what Coinbase is trying to do with our self-custodial wallet, which I can talk about if you want. But anyway, I think those three pieces are going to probably, when we look back on crypto in 5-10 years, we'll say those were kind of similar moments that led to, okay, eventually we got to a couple billion people using it every day.
Okay. Thank you. And now that was Warren Buffett. Now a couple seconds of Charlie Munger, his late investment partner.
But I don't know if that answer would have helped Warren Buffett, but I mean, I think his point of view may actually, I haven't met him personally, but I think his point of view might be a little bit more like the dollar is king. And
here's Charlie Munger.
The same is evil because it undermines the Federal Reserve System and the national currencies.